The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Misty Creek as Winifred Clarke hurried past the church, clutching her satchel of herbal remedies close to her chest. Whispers followed her like the evening breeze, just as they had since she'd arrived in this small frontier town 6 months ago. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild with promise and peril in equal measure. "There she goes again," a woman's voice hissed from the church steps. "Mixing her potions and filling people's heads with nonsense." Winifred quickened her pace, her skirts rustling against the dusty path. At 23, she'd learned to steel herself against such comments. The daughter of a doctor from Boston, she'd brought her father's medical books and her mother's knowledge of herbal remedies west after their passing, seeking a new beginning. What she'd found instead was suspicion. Pastor Thomas Blackwood emerged from the church doorway, his severe gaze following her progress down the street. "Remember what I said in Sunday's sermon," he called loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Beware those who practice wickedness under the guise of healing." Winifred's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. Last week, she'd successfully treated little Emma Watson's fever when the doctor had given up hope. Instead of gratitude, Pastor Blackwood had used his pulpit to suggest her remedies bordered on witchcraft. As she rounded the corner toward her small cabin at the edge of town, hoofbeats thundered behind her. Winifred stepped quickly aside, expecting another group of cowboys passing through to the nearby cattle ranches. "Whoa there, Atlas!" a deep voice commanded as a magnificent black stallion slowed beside her. Winifred looked up into the sun-bronzed face of a man she'd never seen before. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners beneath the brim of a well-worn hat, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with capable hands that held the reins with practiced ease. "Beg your pardon, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Winifred replied, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "Name's Clayton Reed," he offered with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Just rode in from Colorado Territory. Looking for the Running W Ranch. You're almost there. Continue down this road for another mile, then take the fork to the right," Winifred said, gesturing toward the open country beyond town. "Much obliged," Clayton said, but made no move to leave. "And who might I have the pleasure of addressing?" "Winifred Clarke," she replied, surprised by his continued interest. "Miss Clarke," he repeated, as though committing it to memory. "I hope our paths cross again. If you're working at the Running W, I imagine they will," she said. "It's a small town." "Small enough for folks to have plenty to say about each other, I reckon," Clayton remarked, nodding toward the church where several women still stood watching. "Don't mind them. Some people just don't have enough troubles of their own." With that observation and another tip of his hat, Clayton Reed urged his horse forward, leaving Winifred to wonder how a stranger could so quickly perceive the undercurrents of Misty Creek's social waters. The next morning, Winifred was arranging herbs in her small garden when a commotion from town drew her attention. She brushed the soil from her hands and walked toward the main street, where a crowd had gathered outside Doc Miller's office. "What's happened?" she asked Mrs. Cooper, the baker's wife, who stood on the periphery of the throng. "Accident at the Running W," the woman replied, unusually willing to speak to Winifred in the face of shared curiosity. "New hand got thrown from a horse while breaking it. They say his arm's broken something awful." Winifred's stomach tightened. "The new hand was his name, Clayton?" Mrs. Cooper nodded. "That's what I heard. Poor fellow only started yesterday." Without thinking, Winifred pushed through the crowd to Doc Miller's door. Inside, she found the small waiting room packed with ranch hands, and through the open examination room door, she could see Clayton seated on a table, his face pale beneath his tan, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Doc Miller, a man in his 60s with trembling hands and failing eyesight, stood before him looking uncertain. "Going to have to set that bone, but with my arthritis acting up." "I can help," Winifred said, stepping forward. The room fell silent. Doc Miller frowned. "Miss Clarke, this is not the time for your herb concoctions. My father was a surgeon in Boston, she said firmly. I assisted him with dozens of broken bones before I was 16. And I have willow bark for the pain. Clayton's eyes met hers, recognition dawning through his discomfort. I'd welcome the help, Doc, he said. And something for this pain would be mighty appreciated. Doc Miller hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. These cowboys are more your patients than mine anyway. Always getting themselves busted up. Winifred moved quickly, instructing one of the ranch hands to fetch her satchel from her cabin. When it arrived, she prepared a strong willow bark tea, adding honey to make it more palatable. Drink this, she told Clayton, helping him hold the cup with his good hand. It will take the edge off before we set the bone. You've done this before? He asked, wincing as he sipped the bitter brew. Many times, she assured him. Though usually I was handing my father the instruments rather than doing the setting myself. I trust you, Clayton said simply, his blue eyes steady on hers. Those 3 words, spoken without hesitation, affected Winifred more deeply than she expected. In Misty Creek, trust was the one thing no one had been willing to give her. When the willow bark began to take effect, Winifred carefully examined Clayton's arm, feeling the break in his forearm. With Doc Miller supervising and 2 strong ranch hands holding Clayton steady, she manipulated the bones back into alignment. Clayton's jaw tightened, but he made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. You're doing well, she murmured. The worst is over. Working efficiently, she splinted the arm with flat pieces of wood from Doc Miller's supplies and wrapped it securely. You'll need to keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks, she told Clayton. And I'll prepare more willow bark for the pain. You can steep it yourself. Seems I'm in your debt, Miss Clarke, Clayton said when she finished, his voice husky with exhaustion but warm with gratitude. Just doing what anyone with the knowledge would do, she replied. Funny thing, Clayton said, loud enough for everyone in the crowded office to hear. I was warned on my way into town to steer clear of the wicked woman who lives in the cabin at the edge of town. Yet here you are, the kindest person I've met since crossing into Wyoming territory. Winifred felt her cheeks flush as several of the cowboys shuffled uncomfortably. People fear what they don't understand. Or what makes them feel inadequate, Clayton added shrewdly. He stood carefully, balancing with his good arm. Would it be an imposition if I called on you tomorrow? To check on my arm, of course. Of course, Winifred echoed, surprised by the flutter in her chest. I should examine it daily for the first week to ensure the swelling reduces properly. As Clayton left with the other ranch hands, Doc Miller approached Winifred. That was well done, he admitted grudgingly. Your father taught you well. Thank you, she said, surprised by the compliment. Perhaps. The old doctor hesitated. Perhaps you might assist me from time to time. These hands aren't what they used to be. It was an acceptance, not quite, but it was a beginning. Winifred smiled. I'd be honored, Doctor. True to his word, Clayton appeared at Winifred's door the following afternoon. He'd cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, and had managed to change into a fresh shirt despite his splinted arm. How's the pain today? She asked, inviting him in. Manageable, thanks to your willow bark, he replied, ducking his head slightly to enter the low doorway. Though I suspect I have you to thank more than the tree. Winifred's small cabin was neat and orderly, with bunches of drying herbs hanging from the rafters and shelves lined with bottles of various remedies. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, while a narrow bed with a colorful quilt stood against the far wall. Books unusual in frontier homes filled a small bookcase. You have quite a collection, Clayton remarked, gesturing toward the books with his good hand. My father's medical texts mostly, she explained. And a few novels my mother treasured. Please sit down. As she examined his arm, checking for excessive swelling or heat that might indicate infection, Winifred was acutely aware of Clayton's gaze on her face. May I ask you something, Miss Clarke? He said as she gently rewrapped his splint. Winifred, please, she corrected. And yes, you may. Winifred, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Why does the pastor call you wicked? She sighed, securing the bandage before answering. Pastor Blackwood believes that healing should come only through prayer and the hands of male physicians. He distrusts my herbal remedies and considers my knowledge inappropriate for a woman. Yet you've helped many people here, Clayton observed. How would you know that? She asked, surprised. I listen, he said with a smile. And Cowboy's talk. The men at the ranch told me you saved Hank's leg last winter when he got caught in barbed wire. And you delivered Martha Wilson's twins when no one else could get there during the blizzard. Winifred nodded. People come to me when they're desperate enough. Then they pretend they didn't when the crisis passes. That must be lonely, Clayton said softly. The simple observation, spoken without pity but with genuine understanding, brought unexpected tears to Winifred's eyes. She turned away quickly, busying herself with putting away her supplies. It's the way of things, she said, working to keep her voice steady. I came west knowing it wouldn't be easy. Why did you come? Clayton asked. If you don't mind my asking. Winifred turned back to him, composed once more. After my parents died of influenza, there was nothing left for me in Boston. I thought perhaps in the West, where doctors are scarce, my skills might be valued despite my being a woman. They should be valued everywhere, Clayton said firmly. And I suspect they would be, if not for certain narrow-minded individuals using their positions to influence others. You mean Pastor Blackwood? Winifred said. Clayton nodded. Men like that exist everywhere. They control through fear and judgment. You sound as though you speak from experience, she observed. A shadow crossed Clayton's face. Let's just say I've encountered my share of self-appointed judges in this world. He stood, changing the subject. I should let you get back to your work. Same time tomorrow? Yes, Winifred agreed. And bring your horse. I'd like to see this Atlas who carries you so proudly. Clayton's smile returned. He'd be honored by your attention, as am I. After he left, Winifred found herself standing in her doorway long after he'd disappeared from view. Something about Clayton Reed intrigued her beyond his handsome face and kind manner. There was depth to him, and perhaps secrets, but also a straightforwardness she found refreshing. For the next week, Clayton came daily for Winifred to check his arm. Each visit lasted longer than the one before, their conversations flowing easily from books they'd read to places they'd seen. Clayton told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents young, and working his way west as a cowboy. Winifred shared stories of Boston, her father's medical practice, and her mother's love of literature and music. What Clayton didn't share and what Winifred didn't ask about was why he'd left Colorado Territory so suddenly or why he sometimes grew quiet when certain topics arose. She sensed he had his reasons, just as she had her own private sorrows. On his 8th visit, Clayton arrived with Atlas and another horse, a gentle chestnut mare. I thought you might enjoy a ride, he explained. Doc Miller says I can start using my arm more, and Foreman Jackson gave me the afternoon off. Winifred hesitated. I haven't ridden since coming west. This is Penny, Clayton said, patting the mare's neck. She's the gentlest horse at the running W. Even with one good arm, I could catch her if she bolted, which she won't. The day was perfect for riding, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Winifred changed into her most practical skirt, and returned to find Clayton patiently waiting. You look lovely, he said as he helped her mount. They rode away from town, following a creek that wound through rolling hills dotted with pines. As they climbed higher, Winifred felt a freedom she hadn't experienced since arriving in Wyoming. Away from the judgmental eyes of Misty Creek, she could breathe deeply and laugh without reservation. Clayton led her to a small plateau overlooking the valley. Below them, the Running W Ranch spread across the landscape, its buildings tiny in the distance, while the town of Misty Creek looked like a child's play set. It's beautiful, Winifred said as they dismounted and let the horses graze. I've seen many places across the West, Clayton replied, spreading a blanket he'd brought for them to sit on. But this view is special. They shared the lunch Winifred had packed: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, and talked as the sun moved across the sky. When they finally fell silent, the companionable quiet between them felt as natural as breathing. I'm glad you broke your arm, Winifred said suddenly, then laughed at his surprised expression. That came out wrong. I mean, I'm glad it brought you to my door. So am I, Clayton said softly. Though I'd have found my way there eventually. Would you? She asked, meeting his gaze. From the moment I saw you on that street, standing tall despite the whispers, I wanted to know you, he admitted. The broken arm just gave me a respectable excuse. Winifred smiled. And what's your excuse now that it's healing? Clayton reached out with his good hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Do I need one? The question hung between them, filled with possibility. Winifred's heart raced as Clayton leaned closer, his eyes asking permission. She answered by closing the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with a shared hunger neither had acknowledged until that moment. When they parted, Winifred touched her fingers to her lips, as though to confirm what had happened. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Why not? Clayton asked, his voice husky. Because you'll be moving on eventually, she said pragmatically. Cowboys always do. Clayton took her hand. I'm not just passing through, Winifred. I came to the Running W looking for a permanent position. Foreman Jackson has offered me the job of assistant foreman once my arm heals. You're staying? Hope rose within her despite her efforts to temper it. I am, he confirmed. And I'd like to keep calling on you if you'll allow it. Winifred smiled. I would like that very much. They returned to town as the sun began its descent, both aware that their relationship had shifted irrevocably. As they approached Winifred's cabin, they noticed a small crowd gathered near the church. Pastor Blackwood stood on the steps, his voice carrying in the evening air. The devil works in many guises, he was saying. Sometimes as a healer who draws good Christian men away from the path of righteousness. Clayton's jaw tightened as they rode closer and realized the pastor was looking directly at them. Does he always single you out like this? Only when he feels his influence is threatened, Winifred replied quietly. They dismounted, and Clayton helped Winifred down, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. The gesture wasn't lost on the watching townspeople. Miss Clarke, Pastor Blackwood called. I was just explaining to my flock the dangers of false healing and worldly temptations. Were you, Pastor? Clayton said before Winifred could respond. And here I thought you might be thanking Miss Clarke for setting my arm when no one else could. The pastor's face reddened. Mr. Reed, you're new to our community. You don't understand the situation. I understand gratitude, Clayton replied evenly. And I understand that Miss Clarke has done nothing but help people since she arrived, asking little in return. She practices medicine without proper training or authority, Pastor Blackwood insisted. Her father was a respected physician in Boston, Clayton countered. She has more training than most frontier doctors. Pastor Blackwood's eyes narrowed. She has bewitched you already, I see. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Winifred felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. This was how it always began, the accusations, the fear. But Clayton wasn't finished. Funny thing, Pastor. You call her wicked, but she's the kindest person I've met since coming to these parts. Makes me wonder what you're afraid of. I fear for the souls of my congregation. The pastor replied stiffly. Do you? Clayton stepped closer to the church steps. Or do you fear a woman with knowledge that rivals your own? One who heals bodies while you claim to heal souls? The crowd grew silent, watching the confrontation with wary fascination. Winifred touched Clayton's arm, worried about the rising tension. Clayton, please, she whispered. Don't make things worse. Listen to your witch. Pastor Blackwood sneered. "Before she leads you further astray." Clayton's hand moved to the gun at his hip, but Winifred stepped between them. "That's enough," she said firmly. "Pastor, I have never claimed to be anything but what I am, a woman with medical knowledge trying to help where I can. And Clayton is right to defend me, but violence solves nothing." She turned to the gathered townspeople. "Many of you have come to me in secret when you needed help. I've never turned anyone away, regardless of what was said about me from that pulpit. That won't change, no matter what happens here today." Doc Miller, who had been standing near the back of the crowd, stepped forward. "The lady speaks truth," he said, his voice quavering but determined. "She's been assisting me these past days. Has a steadier hand than mine and knows her medicines. I'd be proud to call her my apprentice, officially." A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. Pastor Blackwood's face darkened. "Doctor, you can't possibly." "I can and I do," Doc Miller interrupted. "This town needs healing more than it needs division, Pastor. And I need help if I'm to serve folks properly in my remaining years." Martha Wilson, a sturdy woman with twin toddlers clutching her skirts, spoke up next. "Miss Clarke delivered my babies when no one else could get to us in the blizzard. They'd have died without her, and likely me too." One by one, others began to speak: the rancher whose son's fever had broken under Winifred's care, the miner whose infected wound she'd cleaned and bandaged, the elderly widow whose arthritis was eased by Winifred's herbal compresses. Pastor Blackwood's influence visibly waned as more voices joined the chorus of support. Not everyone spoke up. Many still looked uncertain or afraid to oppose the pastor, but the tide had shifted. "This isn't over," Pastor Blackwood finally said, retreating into the church. When he'd gone, people gradually dispersed, some nodding to Winifred as they passed, others still avoiding her gaze but no longer openly hostile. Doc Miller approached Winifred and Clayton. "I meant what I said about making you my apprentice," he told her. "This old town could use a proper doctor when I'm gone, and I don't see why it shouldn't be you." "Thank you, Doctor," Winifred said, blinking back tears. "I would be honored. Come see me tomorrow, and we'll work out the details," he said, then nodded to Clayton. "That arm healing up all right?" "Yes, sir," Clayton replied. "Thanks to Miss Clarke's care." After Doc Miller left, Clayton took Winifred's hand. "Are you all right?" She nodded, still processing what had happened. "I never expected. After all this time. People needed a push to stand up for what's right," Clayton said. "Sometimes that's all it takes, one person willing to speak first." "Thank you," she said softly. "But challenging Pastor Blackwood so openly might cause trouble for you at the ranch." Clayton shook his head. "Foreman Jackson doesn't hold with the pastor's views. Most of the hands have benefited from your healing at one time or another." He smiled wryly. "Besides, a ranch needs a good relationship with the local doctor or doctors, as it may soon be." That evening, after Clayton had gone back to the ranch, promising to return the next day, Winifred sat on her porch watching the stars appear. The day's events had changed something fundamental in her life in Misty Creek. For the first time since arriving, she felt seen for who she truly was, not just as an object of suspicion and gossip. And Clayton. Winifred touched her lips, remembering their kiss on the hillside. In just over a week, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible. It frightened her how quickly her heart had opened to him, yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The following weeks brought gradual but noticeable changes to Winifred's life in Misty Creek. Working alongside Doc Miller 3 days a week, she gained credibility among the townspeople. More patients came openly to seek her help rather than waiting until desperation drove them to her door in the night. Pastor Blackwood continued his campaign against her, but his audience dwindled as more people experienced Winifred's healing firsthand. Even some of his most devout followers began to question his vehemence on the subject. Clayton, meanwhile, had become a daily presence in Winifred's life. His arm healed well, and he took up his duties as assistant foreman at the Running W with enthusiasm. Each evening, if ranch work permitted, he would ride to Winifred's cabin, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in the general store, or once, memorably, a kitten he'd rescued from a hollow log. She needed a home, he'd explained as the tiny calico explored Winifred's cabin. And I thought you might like the company when I'm not here. Winifred named the kitten Hope, a reflection of the growing optimism she felt about her future in Misty Creek. On a warm Sunday in July, nearly 2 months after they'd met, Clayton arrived at Winifred's cabin dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. "I thought we might attend church today," he said when she opened the door. Winifred hesitated. Though she'd gained acceptance among many in town, she hadn't set foot in the church since Pastor Blackwood had first announced her from the pulpit. "Are you sure that's wise?" she asked. Clayton took her hand. "We have as much right to worship as anyone. And I think it's time the good pastor realized you aren't going anywhere, and neither am I." His words settled something within her. "Give me a few minutes to change." The church was nearly full when they arrived, and their entrance caused a stir of whispers. Clayton led Winifred to a pew near the middle, nodding politely to those they passed. Some nodded back, others averted their eyes, but no one openly objected to their presence. Pastor Blackwood faltered briefly when he saw them, but recovered quickly and began the service. His sermon, perhaps deliberately, focused on forgiveness and community rather than his usual themes of sin and judgment. After the service, as people filed out into the sunlight, several paused to greet Winifred Martha Wilson with her twins, the elderly widow whose arthritis Winifred treated, and others who had come to respect her skills. "Miss Clarke," a voice called as they were preparing to leave. Pastor Blackwood stood at the church door, his expression unreadable. "A word, if you please." Clayton moved protectively closer to Winifred, but she placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's all right." They approached the pastor, who seemed to struggle with what he wanted to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Miss Clarke, it has been brought to my attention that perhaps I have been overzealous in my concerns about your practices." Winifred waited, sensing there was more. "My wife," he continued reluctantly, "has been suffering with female complaints that she kept hidden from me. Last week, in desperation, she sought your assistance." "I remember," Winifred said carefully, recalling Mrs. Blackwood's furtive visit and the herbal tea she'd prepared for the woman's painful monthly courses. "She tells me you helped her when nothing else would," Pastor Blackwood admitted. "And you asked for nothing in return, not even that she acknowledged your help publicly." "I would never require that of anyone," Winifred said. The pastor nodded stiffly. "I may have been hasty in my judgment of your character, Miss Clarke. While I still believe proper medicine should be practiced by trained physicians, I cannot deny that your intentions appear to be honorable." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but from Pastor Blackwood, it was an extraordinary concession. "Thank you, Pastor," Winifred replied simply. "I trust we can move forward with mutual respect," he said, then nodded to Clayton. "Mr. Reed." "Pastor," Clayton acknowledged, his tone neutral but no longer hostile. As they walked away, Winifred felt lighter than she had in months. "I never expected that," she admitted. Clayton smiled. "People can surprise you. Even the most stubborn ones sometimes see reason when it affects them personally." He escorted her home, where they shared a simple lunch on her porch. The summer day was perfect, not too hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. "I have something to ask you," Clayton said as they finished their meal. "What is it?" Winifred asked, noticing a sudden nervousness in his manner. "I've been saving my wages," he began, "and Foreman Jackson has offered me a parcel of land on the edge of the Running W property. It's good land, with access to water and enough space for a small herd of my own someday." Winifred's heart began to race. "That sounds wonderful, Clayton. There's only one thing missing," he continued, taking her hand. "A home isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's the people inside it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "Winifred Clarke," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I've known since the first day I met you that you were special. These past months have only confirmed what my heart knew immediately. I love you, your kindness, your courage, your healing hands, and your gentle spirit. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Winifred's eyes. "Clayton Reed, you came into my life when I'd nearly given up hope of finding acceptance, let alone love. You defended me when others wouldn't, you saw me when others refused to look, and you loved me when others only feared me. Yes, I will marry you." Clayton slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears of joy. "The pearl was my mother's," Clayton explained, looking at the ring on Winifred's finger. "The only thing I have left of hers. She would have loved you. And I would have loved her," Winifred replied, touching the pearl gently. "It's beautiful, Clayton. There's something else I should tell you," he said, his expression growing serious. "Something about why I left Colorado Territory so suddenly." Winifred listened as Clayton explained how he'd worked for a cattle baron who'd used illegal means to drive smaller ranchers from their land. When Clayton had discovered the truth and refused to participate, the man had threatened his life, forcing him to flee in the night. "I've sent word to the territorial marshal with evidence of what was happening," Clayton finished. "But I wanted you to know everything before we marry. I'm not running anymore, but there's a small chance trouble could follow me here." Winifred squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me. We'll face whatever comes together." The wedding took place 4 weeks later in the town square of Misty Creek. To Winifred's surprise, nearly everyone in town attended. Doc Miller gave her away, his roomy eyes bright with pride. Even Pastor Blackwood participated, performing the ceremony with unexpected warmth. Clayton had built a small but sturdy cabin on his land, with room to expand as their family grew. The day after the wedding, he carried Winifred across the threshold of their new home, which he had furnished simply but comfortably. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the details: the bookshelf he'd built for her medical texts, the herb drying rack hanging from the ceiling, the wide windows that let in abundant light for her work. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Winifred marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months. From an outsider viewed with suspicion to a respected healer with a husband who adored her and a community that increasingly accepted her. "What are you thinking?" Clayton asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "That happiness found me when I least expected it," she replied, nestling closer to him. "And that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings." "Not an ending," Clayton corrected gently. "Just a new chapter." He was right, of course. Their story was just beginning. Over the next year, Winifred continued working with Doc Miller while also tending to patients at the Running W and surrounding ranches. Her reputation grew beyond Misty Creek, and occasionally people traveled considerable distances to seek her healing skills. Clayton thrived as assistant foreman, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the trust of Foreman Jackson. In his spare time, he worked on their homestead, adding a small barn, a chicken coop, and expanding their cabin to include a dedicated space for Winifred's medical practice. Their happiness seemed complete, but both longed for children to fill their home with laughter. When Winifred discovered she was expecting in the spring of their second year of marriage, their joy knew no bounds. "A baby," Clayton whispered, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Winifred covered his hand with hers. "The first of many, I hope." The pregnancy progressed well through summer and into fall. Winifred continued her work, though Clayton insisted she rest more and avoid the more strenuous aspects of frontier medicine. Doc Miller, now officially retired but still active as Winifred's advisor, checked on her regularly and pronounced both mother and child to be in excellent health. On a crisp December morning in 1881, with snow falling gently outside their cabin windows, Winifred gave birth to a daughter they named Clara Hope Reed. She had Clayton's blue eyes and Winifred's delicate features, and from her first moments she possessed a strong cry that made both parents laugh with delight. "She has your spirit," Clayton said as he held his daughter for the first time, all evident in his voice. "And your determination," Winifred replied, watching as tiny fingers curled around Clayton's much larger one. As winter deepened, their small family settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Clayton took over most of Winifred's patience, while she recovered and focused on caring for Clara. To everyone's surprise, Pastor Blackwood and his wife were among the first to visit, bringing a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. "Mrs. Blackwood made it herself," the pastor explained, watching as Winifred wrapped Clara in the soft blue wool. "She wanted the child to have something to keep her warm in the cold months." "It's beautiful," Winifred said sincerely. "Please thank her for her kindness." Pastor Blackwood cleared his throat. "I also came to ask if you might be willing to help establish a proper infirmary in town. The church has funds set aside, and with Doc Miller retired, we need someone to oversee medical care for the community." Winifred exchanged a surprised glance with Clayton. "You want me to run an infirmary? You're the most qualified person in the county," Pastor Blackwood said simply. "And it seems the Lord has blessed your healing hands, regardless of my earlier misgivings." It was as close to a full apology as the proud pastor would ever come, and Winifred accepted it as such. "I would be honored to help, once Clara is a bit older." By the following spring, plans for the Misty Creek Infirmary were well underway. A small building near the center of town was renovated, with 2 examination rooms, a recovery room with 4 beds, and a dispensary for medicines and supplies. Winifred divided her time between the infirmary, her home practice, and caring for Clara, who grew more curious and active each day. Clayton supported her in all her endeavors, often bringing Clara to town to visit her mother during the day. On the infirmary's opening day, the entire town gathered for a celebration. Mayor Harrison cut a ribbon across the door, and Pastor Blackwood offered a blessing. Winifred, standing with Clara in her arms and Clayton by her side, felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal happiness. She had found not just acceptance in Misty Creek, but a true home and purpose. "I'm so proud of you," Clayton whispered as they toured the completed facility. "Look what you've built here." "What we've built," Winifred corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." As the years passed, the Reed family prospered. Clayton eventually became foreman of the Running W when Jackson retired, and later purchased a significant portion of the ranch when the owner decided to return east. Winifred continued to run the infirmary, training several young women as nurses and one promising young man as her medical assistant. Clara grew into a thoughtful, intelligent girl with her mother's healing instincts and her father's straightforward manner. When she was 4, the Reeds welcomed a son, William Thomas, and 2 years later, twin girls they named Elizabeth and Margaret. The old whispers about the wicked woman faded into distant memory, replaced by stories of Doc Winifred and her remarkable family. Even Pastor Blackwood, in his final sermon before retirement, acknowledged that he had been wrong to judge so harshly what he had not understood. On a warm summer evening in 1888, as they sat on the porch of their now expanded homestead watching their children play in the fading light, Clayton took Winifred's hand, the same way he had that day he'd proposed. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if I hadn't broken my arm that day?" he asked. Winifred smiled. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are meant to be. Like a pastor calling a woman wicked, and a cowboy knowing better?" Clayton teased. "Exactly like that," Winifred agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "The best love stories start with someone seeing what others miss." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clayton kissed his wife with the same tenderness he'd shown on that hillside 10 years earlier. Their love had weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs, grown deeper with each passing year, and created a legacy that would continue long after them. In Misty Creek, people would tell their story for generations about the healing woman once called Wicked, the cowboy who saw her true heart, and the love that transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. And in that telling, they would remember that sometimes the most profound truths come from the simplest observations. The pastor called her wicked, the cowboy said, "Funny, she's the kindest person I've met."